All right, well, thank you, Dan. We've known each other for quite a while, and it's good we can connect up like this. And it's good to make a record of a lot of this stuff. Absolutely, a lot of our experiences, because when we're gone, that history goes with us. Unfortunately, if we don't record it, I've always felt that there is no story that should not be recorded. It should not be lost to history. That's the definite thing. But yeah, I got into this. I'm an old monster hunter. I call myself a monster hunter. I track them sometimes, and I like tracking monsters. And I've been doing this for well over now half a century, and it's never got old. I enjoy it. I enjoy all aspects of the paranormal and the supernatural. I began active investigation when I was about the age of 15 years old. That year, I had a paranormal experience that where I saw actually saw three spirits, spiritual beings, and that kind of lit the fire under me to understand this other side of the universe that we can't see, how the unseen affects the seen, which is why later on I became a doctor of metaphysics to understand a lot of this. And but it lit a fire under me all those years ago. Fire that's still burning, burning hotter than it ever has before. Actually, the older I get, the more interested, the more I know that definitely my time's running, getting shorter, and I want to know more. So investigation has stepped up a few rungs for me, definitely. But at the very early age of 15 is when I began active. I've always been interested. I can't remember a time when I was a monster kid. I like to watch the monster movies when I was a kid. I watched a lot of the old Universal movies, Universal Studio movies, and stuff like that. I remember my teachers getting on to me when I was very young about watching all the monster movies, and they said, doesn't that scare you? Doesn't it give you nightmares? And I said, well, no, no, I like it. I enjoy it. And I said, and but even as a child, I kind of knew in the back of my mind that what gave me sort of, comfort with that thing was that I didn't really believe all of this stuff. Of course, what I was seeing was made up. I knew that. A part of me knew that, although I enjoyed it. But I put on the back of the latest book I'm coming out with pretty soon. I put a little thing on the back that says that shows a little boy watching TV, watching monster movies on TV, and this is what it says. And this is sort of a motto I've lived by. It says that when you are a child, you believe that monsters are real. Then you grow up to find out they really are. And that's my experience with it, definitely. And throughout the years, I have tracked many different types of beings. I have been on the trail of werewolves. I have been on the trail of vampires. I've hunted them. I've actually looked for the wampus cat. I've looked for the shadow wolf. All the different types of cryptids that are out there. I've been from West Virginia down to Alabama looking into these things. Matter of fact, I can see the Appalachian Mountains from my front door. So I have always been in this region, and it is a fascinating. It is one of my absolute favorite places in the world because it has so much superstition, so many legends and stories, and cryptids and all this other stuff that's involved with it. But I remember the very first case that I had that I actually physically investigated. I was 15 years old, and it was a werewolf sighting. Werewolves are some of my favorite cryptids, definitely. I have studied them extensively over the years. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories related to that in a few minutes here. But the interesting thing is that the one that I investigated at that time turned out to be something, I think, from a bottle, more or less. But it did still disappoint me. It made me want to know more and more about these things. And as a matter of fact, where the town that I am born in, where I live now, actually had a werewolf sighting back in the 1940s. Very famous werewolf sighting that made national and international headlines, as a matter of fact. And I have been involved in that over the years, looking more and deeper into that case as well. But unfortunately, that werewolf has never put in an appearance. I'm waiting for him. I hope he will one day. I hope he comes back. But anyway, over all these many decades, I've gone by several rules of my own when it comes to monster hunting. The number one rule is as the hunter, you never want to become the hunted. And you've got to be very careful about that. I enjoy going through the woods looking on the trail or something. I enjoy tracking things, and most of the time you will not have clear tracks. We call that a track line. Sometimes you will not have a clear track line, but you still see things. You may see a broken branch or some disturbed grass or leaves. You can still track something like that if you know how to do it and if you're watching in various views. But you've got to be very close to your environment, and you've got to kind of know what it is you're looking for. I tell a lot of wannabe monster hunters something that's very important that they should remember. You need to have a plan in place if you do find the monster. A lot of them say, "I don't know what I'm gonna do with that," or they don't have that plan. But you need another rule of monster hunting is you definitely need to know what it is you're looking for. You need to know everything about it, its nuances, the tracks it makes, and whatever the situation is. And also, of course, you need to know how to protect yourself against it should you actually find this monster. And I remember very distinctly, it's been many years ago, I was with two Cherokee brothers in the mountains of North Carolina one night. Well, it was almost nightfall. And we had been tracking what we thought that day was the Wampus cat. Now, the Wampus cat is a very unusual sort of mountain lion looking cryptid. It is very large, though, bigger than an average mountain lion. Here's the interesting part about it. It's supposed to have 6 legs. And so what we were tracking what we thought this thing was. That's what we were looking for. Okay. We didn't know that it was something else altogether different. But we had never gotten any clear tracks on this. We didn't have a clear track line, although there was still, a way to track it. And they were excellent trackers. They were two brothers, I think, or cousins, something like that. They were kin to each other. But they were excellent trackers. They're good friends of mine. They both passed on now. But they were great trackers. And it was getting dark, and finally we got a clear track line down by next to a creek that was running down through a holler that was down in there. And so we noticed something very strange about these tracks, and they got kind of quiet. They were, I wouldn't say they were real talkative, because you don't need to be that way in the woods, especially when you're tracking something. But they got very quiet, more quiet than usual, and they began to slow down a little bit. And I noticed this, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know if maybe they were getting tired or what, And so as we went on, I got to looking at these tracks. I got a clear look at them. And I looked at one of the brothers and I said, "That's not mountain lion-like tracks. That's not cat tracks." And they said, "Yeah, that's not cat." They agreed with me. "Yeah, that's not cat tracks." And what we were looking at was on 4, you could tell it was, on 4 legs. It was on 4 feet going down through there. And as the track line went along, I noticed something very strange. It began to look like it was walking on 2 legs instead of 4. And that's when we stopped, and it was like getting dark. And I remember very well, it was getting kind of dark, and there was, storms back over the mountains. We could see lightning around us. There was no rain yet, but it was, it was sort of a muggy fall day. I remember that well. We could see through the woods pretty good. The leaves had not completely all fallen off, but there had been pretty good leaf fall. And I got looking out, so I looked at one of the brothers and I said, "This is weird," because this thing started. I said, "Is it running?" Because sometimes an animal when it runs makes different kind of tracks. Sometimes they will actually, and bears are very bad about this. Bears, and I've run into a lot of them over the years. Bears will sometimes step in their own tracks. That's just the way a bear is. He's kind of lumbers around. He does that. I consider the bear to be the real king of the forest. You got to respect those guys. They will eat anything, and I do mean anything. But this was not bear tracks. This was something else. And I said, I got to looking, and I said, "This looks like a big dog or almost like wolf tracks," but it still did not look like actual wolf tracks. And at that time, there weren't, I don't think, any wolves left in the mountain. They have been programs that had put the wolves, I think the red wolves, back in the North Carolina mountains, but they weren't at that time. This has been many years ago. And I said, "This is a big dog, or what is this?" And one of the brothers looked at me, and he said, he had a funny look on his face, and he said, "It's not a dog. It's not that." And that's when the other brother said something to him in Turkey. Okay. And I said, "What did he say?" And he had a look on, kind of a funny look on his face. He said, "Look," he said, "we didn't sign up to go with you to track any kind of a damn werewolf out here." And that's what this is, a werewolf. And we're leaving now. And I said, okay, well, that's the case. That I'll probably have to leave with you. I'm not going to stay here all in the dark with this. So that was very interesting. And it made an impression on me. What were we tracking that day? And whatever it was, and here's a little side note on this story. Whatever it was had been playing with us all day. It was like playing a cat and mouse game with us. It would slow down and it would hurry up, so it would speed up. It was like it was playing us and leading us deeper and deeper into the woods there. And that was kind of strange. And that kind of made me feel kind of suspicious too about this thing. What was it up to? And here's the thing about the werewolf, okay? And I've done a lot of lectures and stuff on werewolves. I've studied them a lot over the years. And I think I'm going to tell you the story shortly, but one I think I may have actually seen. But the werewolf, the most dangerous aspect of it, of all the cryptids that you may run into, the werewolf definitely has a very bestial, huge body, a very muscular, very deadly kind of a beast. But the most deadly part of the werewolf is the fact that it has the mind of a man. That makes it more dangerous than anything you could ever possibly run into most of the time. And this thing was like that. It was like leading us on. It was playing with us. That's what it basically was. And so when they left, I left with them, and that was the end of that tracking episode. But that was very strange. They both kind of, they kind of turned pale. They said, "We're not going to do this. This is it. We're leaving." And these guys, they weren't wimps. I mean, they were really manly men. They wasn't going to run from anything. But when they ran into this, they changed their minds very quickly, because they knew, like I do, and I found out later, that the werewolf is an apex killer. It is psychotic in the way that it tracks people down. Once it gets your scent, and I do mean that literally, once it gets your scent, it will never stop until it takes care of you one way or the other. And most of the time, you do not live that. Somebody asked me the other day, Dr. Carroll, why aren't there that many werewolf sightings on record? There's one good reason why. Because no one ever lives most of the time to give any kind of report on them. That's the werewolf. It doesn't usually leave you alive. I've talked about this over the years with Dogman and werewolves. And the one important thing about Dogman, and I may have spotted him too on occasion, the one thing about Dogman is that he is Dogman 24/7. That's the way he always remains. He's part of the animal kingdom in some ways. The werewolf is different. The werewolf is made up of demonic type energy, darkness. It is something that is very supernatural, and yet it exists physically also at the same time in our reality. But the werewolf, if it gets on your trail, it's never going to cut you a break. It's going to get you. And if you ever live through an actual werewolf sighting or experience, you are incredibly, incredibly lucky. Somebody's looking out for you, definitely, because the werewolf will not usually let you go. And there's an old saying, I think, in Europe about the werewolf, that he will hunt you down by night, and when the sun rises, there will not be anything left of you to be seen.
Wow, that is very interesting. Now, I don't know. What about Bigfoot? Now, one thing you mentioned about the werewolf, and how it's more of a demonic thing. Also physical in the same realm. Some people believe that Bigfoot is also both physical and could be also spiritual as well. I mean, do you see Bigfoot in the same manner?
Absolutely. There may be some actual connection to that, because the Bigfoot sighting that I had, and I had sighted him several times over the years, way off a distance or to the woods. It wasn't what I call a clean sighting. You couldn't I could see him, but I couldn't really make out a lot of features on him. I knew what he was, though. It wasn't a bear. I mean, I've spotted bear many times. People, what you saw was a bear. Oh, no, it wasn't that. I know what a bear looks like. And that's what it comes to with a wolf or werewolf, actually. When you start, a lot of people say, oh, that was a bear. Bears do not have pointed ears. Bears have rounded like ears. You can tell the different profile of a bear compared to that. But the Bigfoot sighting I had when I finally actually had a close-up sighting of it was very dramatic in that way. I had two guys with me that night, and we were doing like what they do when they flush man-eating tigers out of the jungle. I sent one guy on the left of me way down in the woods, and I sent the other guy on the right of me way down in the woods. I stayed in the middle, and I stayed right there. I remember sitting on a log that night. It was dark. I mean, nobody really realizes, unless you go out in the woods a lot, like you and I do, definitely, how very, very dark it can be out there, especially when there's no moon. And there was no moon that night. But I was scanning the forest with a a monocular that was a night vision scope. And if you've ever used one for long periods of time, they will begin to hurt your eye a little bit, And so I was kind of testing when I heard him. I heard him coming up slightly, and it was not very loud because this guy is excellent at the movement that he moves, the way he moves through the woods and everything. But I heard it. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was one of the guys. What really I was thinking about, maybe it's one of those guys coming back, and that kind of, ticked me off because he wasn't supposed to be coming back right now. So I stood up, and the moment I stood up, I put the binocular to my eye, and that's when I saw him. He was maybe, the moment I stood up, I could have reached out and actually touched him. That's how close I was to him. I could smell him. I could almost even feel the heat off of his body. And it was a hot, muggy summer night, I could almost feel that off of him. And the expression on his face is he kind of turned to me. What he was going through some very small saplings in front of us. They were 5, 6 foot high, something like that. And he had moved one. One of them was moving, And as he went by, he had brushed it, and he was going towards a very large white oak tree that was there. I mean, very large. It was so large I could not put my arms all the way around this tree. It was huge. And it was at least 200 or 300-year-old oak, definitely. Anyway, he was going towards that and was about to step behind it when he looked back at me like, well, what are you doing here? He had sort of a surprised look on his face. I'm sure I had one on my face too. And we were like, God, and I was still looking through the binocular, and I couldn't, and I didn't want to take it down because I wouldn't be able to see him. And I was still looking through the binocular at him. And that's when he kind of looked at me and and it was a very strange expression. It was like, well, what are you doing here? You're the last thing I need tonight. It kind of, ticked him off a little bit, I think, because I was there. He didn't like it, put it that way. I got that feeling from that. And it was not ape looking like a lot of people think Bigfoot. It was not. It didn't appear to me as being more ape feature like, but he was different featured than a man would be. I've tried to find some pictures over the years. I'm not that good at painting and drawing, but I've tried to find pictures over the years that got very close to what I saw that night, just from my own recollection of it. But I wanted to say this: while looking through that monocular, I noticed something very strange about it. And I thought about it, didn't right at the time. I didn't, I registered it, but didn't, pursue it until later when I was thinking about this experience. But the image of him was like fuzzy, like around the edges. And I'm not going to say he was dematerializing. I'm not going to go that route. I'm not sure. But it may have been an effect of the monocular, night vision thing on the very fur, the reflection off his fur or something. It could have been that. I can't really say for sure 100%. But let me tell you this. The moment he stepped behind that live oak, and a lot of people said, well, didn't you want to run, Dennis? And I said, no, I was running towards him. I wanted to see more of him. I was close enough. I could have reached out and grabbed him. I was that close to him. And as he went in behind that live oak, I followed him immediately. I went around it and went behind, and he was gone completely. And I could see down through the woods. I was looking for the binocular everywhere. There's no way he could have walked off down through those woods without me seeing a trail that he left behind. There was no way you could. So I looked up the tree. Was he up in the tree? I looked around. Was there a big hole around here? I searched. Matter of fact, I went back the next day and looked all around there. Was there some kind of hole, some kind of hidden trap door? To this day, I can not tell you where he went when he got behind that oak tree, but he just was not there in my reality anymore. Definitely. Because if he had been, I would have been able to have seen him. I was that close enough to him. And the most interesting thing about this sighting was the next day when I went back, I remember a limb over his head, and I measured that limb, and it came out as something like around 8'7", at least. He was very muscular, but he was very lean muscular. He wasn't built like a bodybuilder kind of muscle, like, you know, what you see in a lot of these depictions of Bigfoot. He was very lean, but very muscular, still muscular, but kind of lean. And his movements were very fluid. He was not, you know, like a bear. Bears can be kind of lumbering. They can kind of be hard to move. He was very fluid. Coming through those saplings, let me put it this way. He came through those saplings better than an indigenous person would be able to. That's how, I mean, he came through those so quietly and everything. I was just very incredibly lucky to see him at the beginning and to know it was there, because I thought it was one of those guys, you know. I wasn't even thinking about it. And there had been no clue that he was there, but we had flushed him out. That's what had happened. He came back up the middle and didn't know that I was there waiting on him in the middle of it. But to this day, I cannot tell you where he went. I do not know. But the interesting thing is, these things do, like Dogman and some other cryptids, have a spiritual side to them. It would not surprise me at all. But like I said, for me, the jury's still out. I keep wanting to see more of him. I want to track him and find him. I want to experience more of him. I could tell you more about it. But the mystery for me has only deepened more. Where did he go? How did he do that? Did he walk into the tree? I mean, where did he go? That to me is the most puzzling part of this whole incident.
Nice, nice. So, out of your research, you feel is it more towards the dogman or the werewolf cryptids that you feel that you are more attracted to rather than Bigfoot, or how do you see yourself in that way?
Well, can I look for anything out there like that? I mean, yeah, here's the interesting thing. It always came home to me. When I first experienced my first actual encounter with a supernatural being, and I think there may be some properties to definitely these cryptids that is a supernatural. I know the werewolf has definitely got a supernatural tie to it, unless it is a cursed person. That's a different story. There are many types of different types of werewolves. But the most interesting thing to all this that affected me, even at a very young age, when I saw and experienced the fact that there actually was something like this existing in this universe with me, I was haunted ever after that. And it still haunts me to this day with every interaction and encounter that I have. And one question has come back to haunt me. And that is, if this is real, what I'm seeing is real, then my God, what else is out there? What else is still is existing out there? And that's been my quest to find that, to find out what else is out there. And that's what that fire that was lit under me is for. I've seen spirits. I have seen full-bodied apparitions. I have seen demonic spirits. I have seen many different types of. I've encountered skinwalkers. I've seen witches at work. I've had death curses put on me, as a matter of fact. I have studied extensively in the occult, the things about the occult, the supernatural, the things of superstition and folklore. I've gotten deep into all these things because it's part of the clues that we need to look at. It's part of the connections that we make. And you know, I told somebody not long ago, that's why I'm so interested in all of this stuff, is that it is all in some very strange way connected. And people will say, well, how is it connected? Because we are the connection to it. We're connected to all of these things, and that's the main connection. And we interact with these things and see them. But once you experience these, it changes your whole outlook and attitude on things. It turns you 180 degrees in a different direction, because then you know. Seeing is truly believing. That's just the way it goes. We're human beings. But seeing is truly believing. And when you see it and you do believe, then you have more questions than unfortunately you have answers.
Interesting. One of the questions I want to ask you is a lot of people, and myself included, along with some of the others in my team, we have experienced seeing strange, unexplainable lights in the woods. And some would say that they are type of orbs. I mean, perhaps maybe they are, but seeing a light appear and then go away and not picturing anything other, no thermal heat signatures, nothing whatsoever. I mean, have you ever experienced anything like that? Either or, what's your take on the lights in the woods? How would you look at that?
I have seen, we tied them, they have many different names. People call them the will o' the wisp, ghost lights, they're called corpse candles. They have many different names. They've been given to them down over the years. I've actually seen the brown mountain lights. I'm sure you've heard of them. I have experienced seeing the brown mountain lights. You're talking about weird. That is a very strange experience. But I think some of these things may be naturally occurring. We just don't know what they are. I call them earth mysteries. We don't know what they are. That may be, some kind of electromagnetic stuff going on or whatever. But some of these things, the ones you got to really pay close attention to, are the ones that act like they have an intelligence to them. Now, I have actually seen spiritual energy manifest into things like we would call an orb, and it has an intelligence to it. That's what is what I would call the true orb experience. Other things you may see, especially capturing things on camera and all that, most of the time will be dust motes and water droplets in the air. They may exhibit weird qualities. I've seen a lot. I've seen everything that can happen on a video camera. Okay. Light and this stuff has very strange properties that can screw around with you sometimes, definitely. But I can go out on a rainy day with a camera and catch you a million orbs. That's the way that goes. Those are the other kind of orbs. Those are naturally explained. But there are some that are not. And I've experienced orbs that would actually stop and go around an obstruction, just like you and I would. They would stop and go around it. That is intelligence. There's something there with that. But I have also seen spiritual energy manifest in orbs that would pop a visible pop. You could hear them. They would pop like, not real loud, but you could hear them. And they would go away and dissipate. That is a spiritual energy too. So you have many different types of orbs and lights But a lot of the old folks warned about following any of these lights. You ever see them, and I never did. That's one of the rules of the Appalachian Mountains. If you see a strange light in the woods, do not follow it, because you may not come back. And a lot of these things are tied to, I would call, evil spirits in some ways. They are out, just like that thing was leading us through the woods. They are out to trick you sometimes, and it's never a good, happy kind of trick that they're trying to pull on you. It can be very detrimental to your safety, because that's just the way these things work sometimes. And there are many stories of people actually following these lights who have never come back from them, or their bodies were found later deep in the woods in places they would not have normally been, like maybe in ditches or ravines and stuff like that. It's almost as if they were led there on purpose, definitely. So there are bad things out there that definitely do not like you, and they will do these kind of little devilish. The old folks call them devil tricks. They will do these devil tricks on you to cause you harm, or just to get you lost sometimes, or whatever the situation is. So it's not a good idea to follow these lights if you do encounter them in the woods. And there have been many reports over the years, supposedly, of some of these orbs being associated with Bigfoot and other cryptids as well out there that they're seen on. And of course, there's a lot of reports too of UFOs being sighted at the same time you have Bigfoot sightings. So there's a correlation with some of that. It's very strange stuff. Like I said, in some weird, way out, flaky kind of way, all this stuff is connected along different lines. And the more you look at the patterns, the more you can see this connection. it's still hard to understand it in many ways, but you still see the patterns. And that's what I have trained with. You know, when I first got into this, I went to the, I'm an ex-police officer anyway, but years ago, before I became a police officer, I went to them to understand and learn how to truly investigate these things. And when I go into a place like that, whether I'm looking for Bigfoot or it's spiritual research, I don't like to call it ghost hunting. I call it spiritual research. If you're doing that, or if you're, you're helping someone with a demonic problem or whatever the situation is, and I am a demonologist too, um, I approach it as if it were a crime scene. That's the way I look at it. I like, and I had a lot of people come up and say, "Let me tell you what's going on here." I said, "No, I'd rather you not. Let it talk to me. Let it tell me its story, whatever you're at." And if I go to somewhere, just for an example, looking at checking out a place where Bigfoot has been sighted, that's where you need to go. A lot of people, unfortunately, just go rambling out of the woods looking around, and Bigfoot knows they're there. Okay, Dogman will know you're there from miles away. I think he's reading your intentions too. Sometimes I think he knows what your intention. If you're there to unalive him, he's definitely not going to be sided, and I would be the same way. I wouldn't want you to find me either. It depends a lot, I think, on what your intention is, when you go to look for these things. But the number one place you would go to look is where they have been seen before. That makes common sense. You don't just go rambling around. But you hunt Bigfoot, especially like deer hunting in some way. You're kind of, waiting around to kind of ambush this guy. That's the way you're going to really get a better chance at seeing it. Of course, you may get incredibly lucky and come up on him walking in the woods, but you got more of a chance by staying in one spot, becoming part of the environment, letting nature get used to you. This same thing is the same way you do spiritual research. You got to become part of the environment. And once you do, you've got a much better chance at experiencing whatever it may be that is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, one of the things I'll add into that is I know when me and my team, when we go out there to do our exploring, our hiking or whatever we do, well, I mean, we go out there with an innocent approach. I like to say, a non-aggressive, but when we do go out there to look for answers, we come back with more questions. That's the way it seems most of the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like the area we're investigating right now. I mean, like I said, it's got a history there. We have our own experiences there already, and we just want to continue to investigate this particular location, to see if we maybe learn more, experience more. So.
Well, and don't get me wrong now, I said there is a part where you actively walk through and scope out and look for signs and all that. That is part of the hunting thing. But the actual hunting is when you sort of hunker down and wait for him. I've had experience. I had him one time, and it was at a distance of, I was along a trail, and I stopped and got off the trail and just sit in the bushes. And sure enough, here he came. He was behind me. He was backtracking me. And, they're smart. They're, a whole lot smarter than people think they are, or they wouldn't be able to survive the way they do. I think they are incredibly intelligent. I think I've even heard their own language. I think they can mimic things. They can mimic bird calls. They can mimic you. They can mimic your voice. And a lot of times, these mimics that people run into, I don't know, it may be Bigfoot, because they are incredibly intelligent, very smart, or they wouldn't be able to survive the way they do. And I think we underestimate them sometimes, absolutely. But there comes a point when you quit looking around for signs, you quit looking for things, and you got to actively hunt. And if you do that in the right way, with the right attitude, I think you will get more out of it than you will in other detrimental ways. You have to be very careful how you approach these things. Because the one thing I found out over the years, I've had people ask me that, why, Dennis, have you had so many experiences? Why have you seen so many of these things? I think it was one really important reason. I was looking for them, but I was looking for them in the right way. Sometimes when you look into the paranormal, the supernatural, cryptids, and all this other stuff, sometimes when you look into it, it will definitely look back. That's one thing you got to always remember.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, and we were just talking, me and one of my team members, Mr. David Lester. You know, we plan on doing some night stakeouts. Like just go out there and get settled in the area away from camp. Um, and just kind of relax, get settled in the area. And I mean, one of the areas we want to do this in is the area where one of our past camp members that joined us one time actually had a sighting. The gentleman's wife, they came down from Pennsylvania and they had an experience, and which I thought was very fascinating because there's been a history around this area of other sightings and all kinds of strange activity. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, we would love to have more of an experience out there. So I mean, we're going to continue exploring to the best of our ability. I mean, and we put the boots on the ground. There's no doubt about that. We love to explore and look for signs and evidence and look at the different possibilities. Could this be this? Could this be that? Those kind of things. But and we have heard some very interesting vocalizations in the area as well, in the past campouts that we've had out there. So I mean, yeah. So our plan is to go out there and hopefully let them come into us. I mean, that's what we hope for. And because we do a lot of daytime exploring, so we can find possible tracks, and we love looking at the stick structures. A lot of people don't care for that. I do. Because yeah, we know humans build things and do things, but there's certain things that we find fascinating that are well off the beaten path. Those are the kind of things we like to look for. It leads us to the fact that, or the possibility that, hey, this could be or just might be something other than a human, So, but now that we know that there's
Well,
strange lights in the area, and there's Bigfoot sightings, and
mhm.
there's just so much in this area, we want to focus in this area and continue to work this area, which we'll be there next month. We'll spend a whole week, a good week out there, and hopefully something happens.
Well, that is the correct way to do that because you need to stay out there and become part of the environment, and everything settles down. Everything that puts Bigfoot or whatever you're looking for more at ease. Because everything becomes what I call it normalizes the place. And you want to seek that out definitely. But there's and I've studied all the different techniques of hunting over the years, like that. What I was doing that night with flushing out tigers. I've read about them how they hunted man-eating tigers in India and places like that. And I remember one hunter talking about he had been on the trail of a man-eating tiger, and said that he was at in a blind like at the top of a tree waiting for this thing. That's the way you have to track them. You will waste your time going through the jungle trying to trail them down that way. And he said he was up in this blind looking, and he saw it, and he couldn't get a good shot at it. He saw that tiger jump a 12-foot stockade fence, and it was a village, a village in India, and it jumped that 12-foot stockade fence, and in a minute it came back over with a grown man in his mouth and went off through the jungle. He said, I could never get a good shot at it. Later on, he did, so he finally killed it. I think that tiger killed around 15 or 20 people in that district. They had hired him, the British government had hired him to track this tiger down to kill it. He finally got it, but he said that night he didn't have a clear shot at it. And, that's the way it goes with hunting. You got to have a good luck on your side sometimes when you're definitely hunting. But the way you do it, and like he said, he didn't waste his time trying to trail that thing through the jungle because there's no way he would ever catch it that way. He had to lie and wait for it. And that's how he finally got it. Although it didn't help him that night and didn't help that guy in the tiger's mouth that night. But that's the way, and here's the interesting thing about all this stuff when it comes to hunting. And I'm gonna tell you right quick an experience that happened where I think I saw a werewolf one night. But a lot of it is luck. You can just happen to look up on something, and that's what happened to me. I had been going. This also happened good many years back in the North Carolina mountains. I've done a lot of research in North Carolina mountains, although I've been in Virginia and West Virginia as well up in there. But anyway, that night it was getting kind of dark. It was dusky dark, and I was fixing to leave. I had not really been actively hunting anything that day. I mean, I was just looking around, messing. You know how you do. I like to go out and do some bushcraft every now and then. stuff like that. I love to get out in the woods and look around. So I'd been doing that day, and I remember it was a fall day. It was a fall day, and there wasn't a lot of leafage in the trees too that day. And I was looking, and it was getting dark, and down in I will say, I guess you would call it a ravine or deep gully like. It was in front of me, and I saw something down there, and I thought, well, I first thought, oh, it's a bear, because I've run into bears a lot, and most of the time they're black bears. But that's why I call them the king of the woods. They will, you need to respect them, definitely. They can be very bad trouble. Most of the time, though, you can scare them off, and or just get out of the neighborhood without them bothering you, which is the best thing. I look down in this gully and there's something standing down there, and I can't see it because it's in shadow. And like I say, it's getting very close to, sundown here. And it's in shadow and I cannot make it out, but I can see the silhouette of it. And I said, wait a minute, that's not a bear, because it was standing there on two legs. And bears, most of the time, they only get up on two legs to reach up, in a tree or fight other bears or do something. They do not most of the time walk around and stand on two legs. That's just what bears do. And that's why it kind of makes me laugh when people say, oh, you saw Bigfoot, you probably saw a bear. He was walking through that. Bears do not do that. Unless there's something wrong with them. I saw a bear one time, something wrong with it, that he couldn't get down on all fours. And he did learn how to walk on two legs. They're like people, they compensate for something like that, But anyway, this thing was standing on two legs, and I said, that's not a bear, because like I say, there again, the silhouette was not round ears. They were ears like a German Shepherd, okay? And I'm going, what is that, And I can't make it out good. And then I noticed something else. I said to myself, is this Dog Man? That's the first thing I thought about. That must be Dog Man, and I think spotted him on several occasions. I'm looking, and I said, wait a minute, I saw something. It kind of turned, and he never saw me. This is probably why I'm here alive to tell you this story, okay? But I saw it kind of turn a little bit, and it was wearing a shirt and pants. Dog Man does not wear clothes, okay? As far as I know, he doesn't go around. This was a werewolf standing down there. It had to be. And when I saw that, I said, uh-oh, I think it's time for me to leave now. Because I see him, but right now he don't see me, and I'm not going to stay here for him to do that. So I immediately got out of Dodge, which I would advise that for anybody. If you run up on something you think is definitely a werewolf thing, or even Dog Man, it's not a good idea to hang around. Like I said before over many times, Dog Man will cut you a break most of the time. You will walk away from that encounter. But most of the time you will not walk away from one with a werewolf.
What's your take on Bigfoot? Do you believe that some might be aggressive in the same manner as a werewolf, or you think they pretty much want to be left alone?
I got the feeling, especially the one I encountered that close up, I didn't feel an aggressive nature to him. He had, like I said, he had more of a surprise, sort of a, kind of ticked off a little bit, but not very, very angry like a bear can be sometimes. He didn't have that to him. I just my own personal feeling when it comes to Bigfoot. I think Sasquatch would rather be the kind of guy that, he's gonna do, and he'd rather be left alone. He'd rather not mess with you. He's retiring away from us. I think he knows what kind of animals we definitely are. And knowing that, I don't blame him for not trusting us. I think there's a mistrust. I think there's almost like a fear there. And, it kind of goes back to the biblical things, I remember in the book of Genesis where it says, the fear of you and the dread of you will be upon every beast of the field. And I think that goes over to Bigfoot as well.
I agree wholeheartedly. That makes a lot of sense. If people listen to that and pay attention to that, it makes a lot of sense. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a natural thing that, most wildlife have fear of us, some more than others, so it's something to really pay attention to, and to understand that.
Well, having seen the bad side of mankind and humanity, I don't blame them. I mean, having been a police officer and all that over the years, and I've worked at different jobs that dealt with the public and all that, I definitely do not blame them for having that fear. That is, I think that fear is part of their instinct for survival. And that's why I've told people like the bear I was talking about, you need to respect things like that, what they can do to you. You need to kind of that, and respect can be fear. You know, that's kind of like the fear of God. A lot of times, that doesn't mean you're shaking in your boots. That means you respect God, and I think you respect the things that God has created. If you don't, you're asking for trouble most of the time. And I think they feel that way about us too, because they respect what we can do to them, because we are the most dangerous animal that walks this planet. That's another rule of monster hunting that I've followed over the years. A very important rule is that the monster hunter must never become the monster.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, of course, with my experience with Bigfoot, and I've never, for the record, I'll share that I've never had any other experiences with any other cryptid per se. Bigfoot has been the only one I've ever had experiences with, and just from my experiences alone, and from what I judge Bigfoot to be, is more of a very curious, you know, being. I mean,
Well,
I
that
can
is,
recall the encounter in 2014 that six of them shared together. They were curious. I mean, I believe we also caught them off guard. There's a lot of details. I won't get into that. It'll take up too much time. But I believe anyway, that they were just curious of us as we were of them, just based off of what happened. So
that is also, my friend, a very distinct sign of higher intelligence, curiosity. And I think they are very curious about us. And I think that sometimes puts them at a disadvantage, especially if you're not wanting to be found by someone. But if you're kind of curious about them, and I think they are very curious about us. I've even heard of episodes where people think their names may have been called. They would be on camping, somewhere, and something called their names from the bush. I had that very thing happen to me one night, night fishing on a bank by a lake one night. And I don't know if that was Bigfoot. I think it was something else of a more sinister nature. But I think Bigfoot could do that if you want. I believe he can mimic things because the Native Americans talked about them being able to do bird calls and animal sounds and stuff like that. If you live out in the woods, that would become part of your repertoire of talent. Definitely, you would use that. I think they have their own language. I've even had one woman talk about she may have heard them singing, and that would not be that far fetched either, because these are very, very highly intelligent and very curious animals. And they learn, that's another sign of intelligence. You learn, you're a quick learner, you might say, and you can pick it up pretty quick. And I think that's part of their nature as well. But that also puts them at disadvantage because we are very curious to them. I'm sure and they want to watch us and maybe study us. They're wary of us, but that sometimes exposes them, I think, in ways that they don't like. Their curiosity will do that to them. Like that old saying, curiosity kills a cat. Um, but anyway, I think that's part of their makeup. Absolutely. But one night I was fishing on the bank of a river, and I had something call me by name. And I was with a couple, and they were in bed, and they were asleep in the tent up the hill from me. I knew it was not them. We were out in the middle of nowhere. There were nothing around, nobody around. It had already gotten dark. I was still fishing on the bank. I'm getting ready to quit and go back up to my tent. And there were some bushes nearby, and something in the bushes said, help me, like that. Very low way. It wasn't very loud, it kind of low. And I kind of looked at it and said, well, what is that? What's going on here? And I just kept fishing. I didn't pay any attention. And a few minutes later, it says, help me, help me. And then it called me by name. And that's when I stood up and said, oh, wait a minute, I said, I don't know who or what you are, but you get out of here right now. You leave now and you get away from me, and don't you come back anymore. Get out of here. And it shut up and left me alone. But if it ever happens to you or anybody that you know, there's a good idea not to follow that or acknowledge it, really. It left. because I gave I have authority over it. You have a certain amount of spiritual authority over these things. If you exercise the authority, it will work for you, definitely. And I think that's what happened that night. But they even call me by name like that. That is evil, definitely. That is something that is not good. And I don't think that was Bigfoot. Absolutely not. Because the bushes that sound came out of was not big enough to hide him. That's not what that was. But whatever it was, I let it know that it wasn't welcome there. And that's the way you got to treat some of these things when you run into them, especially those lights that we talked about and all that stuff. But I remember I broke a rule one night in the mountains of North Carolina. Me and another guy, we had been out walking around. We'd been camping that night with a church group. And I was probably I think I may have been I think I was about 16 years old or something like that. And he and I were just walking around. We walked up this dirt road. And I broke a rule that night. From out of a bush nearby this road came the sound of a whippoorwill. Well, I always liked whippoorwills. I thought they were cool because I could imitate their calls, So I told the guy, I said, listen, that's a whippoorwill, I said, watch this. And so I did the whippoorwill, and sure enough, it answered me back. And I'm going, that does, I never had a whippoorwill answer back that quick. You know what I'm saying? Because you'd have to do it a few times before it would finally answer you. And I told the guy, I said, come on, this is weird, So we walk over to the bushes. We walk into the bushes into a stand of trees. And all of a sudden, somebody comes up behind me and behind him, too, and they put a knife to my throat. And they did the same to him, the guy. He was a little bit smaller than me, a little bit, younger. I think he was a year younger than me. And like I said, I think I was about 16 years old. I was pretty tall at my age, but I wasn't tall. I'm 6'4" now. Then I was probably a little over 6 foot. Anyway, they put a knife to my throat. And I'm going, oh, okay, well, I got to do something quick here and talk myself out of this situation. And it was a woman's voice. She said, tell me why I shouldn't cut your, throat right now. And I said, well, I can think of a lot of reasons. Let's not do this. I said, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not bothering you, another thing, So she kind of laughed a little bit, and she took the knife down, and the same one with the guy with me. There were two sisters. They were Cherokee sisters, and they had been sitting at a picnic table that I didn't see until I got in there, under these trees here. And she said, "We're just having a little fun with you, And she said, "What do you guys? What do you mean whistling at me like that?" And I said, "Well, you whistled first, and I just whistled back, She said, "Well," she said, "you're not supposed to do that in these mountains. You know that, don't you? Not never whistle at night, I said, "Yeah, I think I heard of that, definitely." And I said, "I guess I did, I kind of screwed up doing that, didn't I?" She said, "Yes, you did. Don't ever do it again." And I could tell that they were acting kind of strange. And one sister was this one I was talking to was a little bit taller. Maybe she was a year or so older than the other sister. She was a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, And they were both. Well, the other sister was real quiet. She never spoke. I was the one doing the talking. What I was basically trying to do was talk my way out of this and leave immediately. I didn't want to hang around these gals, I mean, if they pull a knife on your throat, what else would they do? So I said, well, we better get back. We're camped back over here, And I said, we better get back, And she said, well, look, she said, do you know there's a lot of weird things go on in these mountains? She said, you better go back to your camp. You better stay there tonight. And she said, before you do, though, she said, I want you to watch those bushes over there, and I'm going to show you something. So I'm going, yeah, what's going on with this? Where's this going? And I said, sure, okay. And so her and her sister walk into the bushes. And in a few minutes, I'm standing there watching. The bushes are moving. I can hear something sound like candy in the bushes. I can move around. And all of a sudden, out of these two bushes, step two wolves. One a little bit bigger than the other. And these two wolves look at us and go on up. They walk off slowly, up that dirt road, up the mountain. And at the end of one of them the big one turns around and looks back at me. And his eyes, honest to God, are glowing red. And they walked off, turned back around, walked off, and went into the night. And that's when me and the other guy booked it back to the camp. And that guy asked me, he said, what was that? Well, he was scared to death. He was shaking like a leaf. I was still sort of, did I see that, And I said, did we see that doing? He said, yeah, I saw it. He said, what was that? I said, I don't know. I think we may have run into some witches or something, you know. That was weird. And I found out later, of course, longer, deeper into research, that they were probably what we would term skinwalkers. Now, skinwalkers are not really native to the Appalachian Mountains. They're in the Southwest. They're in Arizona and Nevada, places like that. But there is a long history of Appalachian witches, dark witches, that can turn into things like wolves or black panthers or ravens. They're very much like skinwalkers, but they're just plain witches. That's what a skinwalker is. It's a witch. And they have a supernatural ability to shapeshift. And that is one of the, and having learned what I have learned, and I'm something of a little bit of authority on the occult, having learned what I've learned, that is one of the premier powers of witchcraft. And tapping into demonic power to be able to do these things. You have to do horrible things to acquire this power, like turning into a werewolf, vampire, whatever you want to turn into, you can shapeshift into it. But it acquires a very high price, a very bad and deadly cost, the cost of your soul being swallowed up by darkness in the end, eventually. But yeah, this is a premier power of witchcraft, along with other powers like invisibility or being able to astral project themselves, being able to fly. The list goes on and on of the powers that they can acquire through demonic rituals and witchcraft. But that night, I found out firsthand that it is real, very real.
With what you just shared with me, it's like a collaboration with what I just heard with a good friend of mine. You may know him, William Nighthawk. I just had his interview. I went and interviewed him and recorded him in person, and he shared in one of his part of his discussion with me. He experienced at a young age, I think he was a teenager, if I recall, a ceremony with 3 sisters, Native American sisters, that were practicing the shape-shifting experience. And they transformed into not the 4-legged wolf, but a 2-legged wolf. And he described them as werewolf, and which was interesting. And, when you were sharing that, I couldn't help but remember and recall what he was sharing when he was discussing that. So I find that very fascinating. To me, it kind of collaborates. It kind of like almost supports what he was sharing with me. So that's very interesting.
I had a good friend who studied a lot of this, J.C. Johnson. He's passed on now, unfortunately. We used to talk about this, and we talked about the things that you do. I do know exactly how you can do these things. I know the ceremonies, the rituals it takes, what it takes to do this shape-shifting. Although I've had a lot of people come to me over the years, how do you do it? I want to know, I want to learn. I said, no, you don't. You don't. I don't want to tell you because you might be tempted to try it, because it exacts a very deadly price from you, not just your life, but your very soul. These things, eventually, you do enough of this stuff, the transformation, that you lose every time you transform into something like this. You lose a little bit of your humanity. Eventually, one day, when you go to turn back into a person, you won't be able to do that. You will be stuck forever in that shape. And you probably usually die not long after that, because the darkness exacts that price from you. You have sold your soul to that darkness. So to acquire this power, it comes with a cost and a very high price. And this is something that I would not wish for anyone, not even my worst enemy, to experience. But it also, at the same time, you got to remember too that this transformation is very painful in some ways, I'm sure, because you're not only changing, you are manipulating, twisting and bending true reality into the way you want it. That's what all witchcraft is. I've done a lot of lectures and stuff on witchcraft over the years. Witchcraft magic is nothing but changing reality. You're changing it to what you want it to be. But you step out, I think, many times outside the precepts of God when you do this. You're going against what the true creation is, because you are arranging your creator's reality, not yours. You don't have that right. You don't really have that spiritual right to do that. So you are an outlaw, a spiritual outlaw, when you do these things. And so that's the price you pay for it. And that's why I caution people, you do not want to go there. I know what it takes. I could do it if I wanted to. No, I've never been tempted to do that because I know what the cost will be. And I don't think anybody in their right mind would want to pay that cost.
Yeah, I find this all very fascinating. Yeah, very informative. Um, Dennis, I want to ask you: do you have any advice? What advice would you give me, my team, or anybody for that matter, that's going out there to explore, to look for answers, to look for evidence? Um, you know, what would be our best chance of experiencing something or finding answers?
I think your frame of mind has a lot to do with what you're pursuing. And of course, whenever you start any kind of expedition to go out to look for something, I don't care what it is, whatever kind of an expedition it is, you do need to prepare yourself spiritually going into and coming out of that situation because you don't want to pick up any unnecessary things. And I've had a lot of cases over the years of people who have done that. You need to protect yourself spiritually because you may be dealing definitely with spiritual entities, whatever form they may take. Um, but I think your frame of mind, and like we said earlier, I think a lot of these things know what your intentions are, and I'm a firm believer in that the pure of heart will definitely see God, and they'll see a lot of other things too. I think they can see more into that spiritual realm if that's what you are encountering with that attitude of a pure heart kind of a thing. And your intentions need to be pure. Your motivation needs to be in line with the good stuff. You will have a much better experience that way. But like I said earlier, you need to become part of the environment, part of that, because that puts them at ease. That tells them you're not there to hang them as a trophy on your wall or whatever the situation is. Um, a lot of people have asked me over the years, what you gonna do, Dennis, when you find a monster? When you come up on a monster, what's your plan? Are you gonna shoot it and kill it? No, I don't need another trophy on my wall. That's not what I'm there for. I want to see it, experience, understand it, and know it for a fact what it is. That's my takeoff on it. That's what I'm going to take away from it. And I'm not out there like some of these people. Oh, I want to prove this. I want to prove that. I want to prove that. You and me, my friend, all of us, that's not our job to prove anything. We can prove it only to ourselves. That's the main thing. And we can experience that. That's what we're there for, the experience, not to prove something to anybody, because in the end, nobody will believe it anyway. You and I can have a picture taken tomorrow with a Loch Ness monster, and who's going to believe it? We'll know it. We'll know it's true because we were there. But we're banging our head up against a tree trying to get other people to believe. That's not what the focus should be on. The focus should be on our own experience with it and our own understanding of it and seeing is truly believing and experiencing what it is we're looking for. That's what you're going for, the experience. You're not out to prove anything. I've said that over the years. I've had a lot of people challenge me on that. I said, I'm not here to prove anything to anyone but myself. And that's the way I look at it. And I think that's the way you need to approach it too, in many ways. And I think these things pick up on that attitude. They know that you're not there as a threat. And there's a reason why Bigfoot is the #1 world hide and seek champion. He's smart. He knows what we would do to him. A lot of people I've talked to a lot of so-called monster hunters. Oh, I want to kill him. I'm going to bring him back. I'm going to be a millionaire. I want to be famous. That's not my motive. Okay, that's not what I'm in it for. And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of people are in this business, whether it be cryptozoology or any other parts of the paranormal and supernatural. They're in it for all the wrong reasons. And over the years, I've helped a lot of people with their demonology problems. I've helped a lot of people learning how to track these things, all these different things. I have actually, tried to motivate people in the right way and been a mentor to them too. and answer their questions. And, you know, I've often said, if I don't know the answers, we'll try to find them together. That's what we need to do. And we need to come together as a community to do that. But we don't need to take it in the wrong way. We need to do these things the right way. There's a right way and a wrong way. And you know what? You waste too much time when you do it the wrong way. We don't have that much time to waste. Okay? Definitely not. Time is our most precious resource. And we need to use it wisely and use it well. But we need to do it the right way. Absolutely. And we need to concentrate on that. And we need to learn the terrain. We need to learn tracking, how to track, even when you cannot see the tracks. They are still there. There is a track. You just need to know how to look for it. And I've taught myself that, self-taught myself over the years. I understand when I can look at a track and see what it is, for sure, you know, and know what it is. Even sometimes you'll have weird, unusual tracks. I ran into something one time years ago. I call it Cryptid X. I do not know what this thing was. I'll tell you a quick story on it before we end. I had been deer hunting that day. I'd been deer hunting with my brothers, as a matter of fact. And he was, I think, going back to his truck and all that. And he said, there's an old farmhouse over there. You know how interested I am and stuff like that. He said, you want to go check it out? You know, I think they, you know, keep hay in it or whatever. So I went over there and sure enough, it's an old farmstead, you know. And all the doors and windows are off of this thing. There are no doors and windows in it. The windows are still there, but there are no window panes in it. And they had probably once stored hay in this house. I mean, because there was a lot of hay laying around and stuff, you know. But I could tell there'd been some partying in this house too, definitely, because I walked in there, was looking around, because I like to see the old homesteads and places like that people lived in years ago, you know. And so I was walking around. I came to the back room, and this was very weird. The whole back room was stuffed full of branches. Now, these branches were not like great big limbs off trees. They were broken branches, okay? And honest to God, the only way I can describe it's like that, but it wasn't that really. It was like a huge bird nest inside this room. And it was filled this room completely. I could not walk into the room, okay? But through this branches, I could see the window over the next to it. And about the time I stepped into the doorway of this room, something went out of that room through that window. Well, I immediately ran. I ran back outside to kind of go around to see what he was. I said, that was not a bear. He moved too fast for a bear. Bears can move fast, but that was kind of faster than I'd ever seen one move. I said, what is that? That was curious to know. And of course, you know, I knew about dog man and stuff like that. So I went around that house quick as I could, but unfortunately it wasn't fast enough. It was disappearing off into the wood line down below me. I could see it, but I couldn't make out what it was. It was dark, tall and dark, and it went into the wood line. So I started, and this is a field like. That's what this farmhouse was sitting in, a field. And this field was what we call a fallow field. It had been plowed up, you know, I think maybe the winter before or whatever, and nothing was growing in it. But it had not rained in a long time. And I want to let you know that it had not rained in quite a while, so it was not a muddy field or anything. It was pretty hard. And when you run in the ground like that, it's very hard to track anything. And I saw the tracks. You know, I could see some weird tracks going down through there to the wood line. And I got to look at them, but I wanted to go on into the wood line, see if I could see this thing, you know. So I got to look at the tracks. I said, oh, that's weird looking tracks. They look kind of dog-like, but they didn't look like that. I've never seen tracks like that before. It was very weird looking. And I kept going, though. I went on into the wood line, looking around, but whatever it was long gone. So I went back. I said, I'm going to go back and look at those tracks, you know. So I said, I got to take another look at those. And they weren't real deep, though. Like I said, it was kind of hard. And I couldn't make them out real good, which is why I want to go back and take another look at them. And I'm going to tell you this. To this day, I have not found those tracks. They were just gone. And the only conclusion I come to it, whatever that thing was that went out of that window, was something that really didn't belong in this world. Or it was not something of the physical world. Because tracks do not disappear like that. And nothing had brushed over those tracks. I mean, I was walked right back to where they should have been. They were gone. And to this day, I do not know what that Cryptid X was, but I'd like to meet it again.
Yeah, that's very interesting, for sure. Dennis, is there any last words you want to share before we close?
Well, I'm going to tell you of all the mysteries in the world, and I think this world would be a very dull and boring place without its mysteries. I love a good mystery. And I think that's one of the icing on the cake of our existence. A lot of these mysteries are things to ponder over, to track, even if you don't actively, if you're an armchair researcher, you know. And I've been a boots on the ground researcher all my life, believing that that is the true teacher. Experience is the number one. You can read all the books you want, you can have all the degrees you want, but until you experience something, you'll not really fully comprehend it. And I tell that to people who think about going into this kind of stuff. Definitely, that's what you want, the experience. You know, you can read a couple of books and say, "Oh, I'm an expert now." That's not what truly makes you an expert. It's out in the field, true boots on the ground research. You got to do that. But even if you're just an armchair researcher, looking into it, it's still fascinating. All the many different rabbit holes that you will go down. It is still the mysteries of this world, I think, that to me, makes a lot of life worth living.
Absolutely. And pretty much what you said, you know, I know for myself, I feel like the experiences that we have become our knowledge, you know, and we kind of, we can learn from that. At least our experiences as a stepping stool, you know, a stepping, you know, stool to where as we gain more experiences, we kind of start putting pieces together, or at least we try to anyway, you know, and we start building conclusions off of what we experience, you know. But you know, me myself, you know, I could only speak for myself, and maybe there's others out there, but we try not to jump to conclusions. But the more you learn about things with based off of what you experience, collaborate with others who experience the same things, and they may have gained more out of their experiences than one with what we or I myself may have experienced, and it gives you something to build off, you know, something to grow off. So, but with my experiences, I love to share my experiences and my conclusions. You know, my biggest thing is spreading awareness of what's out there, and part of the reason why I love interviewing people like you know, and it gives everybody something to listen to, something to consider. If anything, at least consider it. You know, I mean, no one's here to prove to you or you know, shove our beliefs down your throat. Listen to the experiences. No one's here to tell you to believe them, but at least consider them. Is what I would tell people. So, but with all this being said and done, Dennis, I can't thank you enough. This has been amazing. I love the information that you shared, and this has been educational and very informative to me, and I hope others take it the same way. So thank you again for agreeing to do this with me. And
Quite welcome. You're quite welcome. I enjoyed it.
absolutely.